Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at the actual architecture of modern finance. Specifically, we're exploring how the 2008 global financial crisis fundamentally rewired the entire asset management industry. You see, it wasn't just a market crash, it was a massive catalyst. It forced a complete overhaul in how the industry approaches risk, ethical conduct, and, above all, providing fair advice to customers. So let's unpack the exact standards that govern trillions of dollars today. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the 2008 turning point, then move into fair customer advice, followed by entity risks and ethics, ESG integration, and finally, macro-level emissions.
All right, Section 1, the 2008 turning point, because to truly understand the rules we live by today, we first have to look at the fallout of yesterday.
It really brings us to a pivotal question. What actually changed in asset management after 2008? The crisis completely shattered public trust. It exposed massive systemic gaps in how money was handled, how risks were quietly hidden, and frankly, how clients were advised. The entire regulatory regime had to wake up to a glaring reality. The old way of doing business was just dangerously inadequate. The response to that was a critical, non-negotiable shift. The industry was handed a brand new mandate. They absolutely had to move away from opaque sales tactics and pivot toward transparent, genuinely fair advice. And beyond that, risk could no longer be viewed in a vacuum. It had to be strictly managed across three distinct levels: the entity level, the portfolio level, and the overarching macroeconomic level. Now, to actually enforce these newly recognized risks, the industry relies on strict guardrails. Frameworks like the SASB Sustainability Disclosure Topics and Metrics act as a modern scorecard. This framework demands precise, quantitative metrics on everything from fair advice and business ethics all the way out to financed emissions.
Moving on to Section 2, fair customer advice. This is our first real Zoom level, focusing directly on the relationship between asset managers and their clients. When you contrast the old ways of doing things with our new fiduciary reality, the shift is just stark. The pre-2008 era was heavily criticized for the mis-selling of complex, high-yield products that had hidden volatility and liquidity concerns. Post-2008 regulations, however, are strictly intended to align the interests of financial entities and their clients. Today, the focus is entirely on suitability. It's about ensuring an investment strategy actually matches a client's risk tolerance while maintaining total transparency about alternative investments and any conflicts of interest. And here's the thing. Accountability is highly personal now. The standards zero in on what they call identified decision makers. These are the senior managers and directors who hold individual accountability. Modern rules require entities to meticulously track and disclose the percentage of these specific licensed individuals who actually have a record of investment-related investigations or consumer complaints. You literally can't just hide behind the corporate logo anymore. When firms do fail at providing fair advice, they have to show their math. They're required to report their total monetary losses, meaning every single dollar lost to legal proceedings, settlements, and fines that resulted from things like false advertising or hiding fees in the small print. It forces absolute financial transparency whenever a firm fails to act in the customer's best interest. Section 3, Entity Risks and Ethics. We are zooming out a bit here to see how financial firms protect their own operational foundations. Because let's face it, a firm can't protect your assets if it's internally compromised. So the entity itself has to be safeguarded with strict business ethics policies. They're required to track any monetary losses tied to fraud, insider trading, and market manipulation. Crucially, they also need incredibly robust, heavily documented whistleblower policies. This means detailing whether their hotlines are managed by independent third parties, ensuring that internal controls against malpractice are actually doing their job to minimize losses and protect shareholder value. But entity risk isn't just about preventing fraud. It's also about talent. Entities actively track metrics like gender representation across their executive management and professional levels. In a highly competitive market, expanding the talent pool through diversity directly improves operational efficiency, which can actually enhance the risk-return characteristics of the entire firm. All right, Section 4, ESG integration. This is Zoom Level 2, focusing squarely on the actual assets under management. Let's cut through the jargon for a second. The integration of ESG issues simply means the systematic and explicit inclusion of material, environmental, social, and governance factors right into investment analysis and decisions. Why does this matter?
because ignoring these non-financial forms of capital can materially hurt market returns. Failing to consider these factors can result in reduced performance fees and, down the road, a massive outflow of assets under management. So asset managers must now report exactly how they incorporate this into their assets under management, broken down by asset class like equities or fixed income. They report across 3 specific approaches: screening, which could be exclusionary or best in class; sustainability-themed investing, targeting areas like clean energy; and the deep, fundamental integration of material ESG factors into their financial models and strategic asset allocations. But remember, managers don't just passively pick stocks. They act as an active portfolio guardrail. They have to describe their proxy voting and investee engagement policies. This includes defining their objectives, how they review third-party recommendations, and how they actively engage to improve a corporation's environmental and social practices. And when a dialogue fails, well, they have escalation tactics ready to go, ranging from making public statements to aggressively submitting shareholder resolutions. Finally, Section 5, macro-level emissions. We're zooming all the way out now to examine the massive systemic vulnerabilities the industry has to monitor. Which brings us to a major concept: financed emissions. By definition, this is the absolute gross greenhouse gas emissions attributed to the assets a financial institution manages on behalf of its clients. Financing high-emissions clients creates massive macroeconomic vulnerabilities. Measuring these financed emissions serves as a critical indicator for an entity's exposure to climate-related risks, and it dictates how their entire investment strategy has to adapt over time. And no, they can't just throw out a vague estimate. These financed emissions have to be meticulously measured across 3 distinct scopes: Scope 1, direct emissions; Scope 2, from purchased energy; and Scope 3, which covers the broader value chain. This level of granularity actually maps out the true climate risk hiding inside a portfolio. So, the magic number they are aiming for? 100%. Asset managers are heavily pushed to disclose the percentage of their total assets under management that are included in these financed emissions calculations. If that number happens to be less than 100%, the entity is required by the standards to explicitly explain the exclusions, identifying exactly what type of assets were left out and why. So why does this macro-level tracking matter so much to the everyday investor? Well, because counterparties with high emissions are essentially sitting ducks for sudden policy changes. We're talking about increasingly stringent carbon taxes, sudden fuel efficiency regulations, fast-moving technological shifts away from carbon, and intense reputational damage. These macro-level climate factors translate directly into systemic credit and market risks for your portfolio. We've journeyed from the absolute fallout of 2008 all the way to the incredibly detailed multi-level risk management strategies that govern today's financial world. From demanding fair customer advice to locking down entity-level ethics, all the way to pricing in macro-level carbon emissions. Which leaves us with one final, vital question to ask yourself. Are your own investments being actively managed with these post-2008 standards of transparency and multi-level risk management? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.